He missed his flight to save a stranger's life, but he had no idea that in doing so, he was also saving his own. The air in the terminal was stale, a recycled mixture of jet fuel, floor wax, and the quiet desperation of 1,000 hurried goodbyes. Elias Flores felt that desperation in his own lungs, a tightness that had lived there for months. Each breath was a shallow reminder of his failures. The boarding pass in his hand was more than a piece of paper. It was a prayer, a flimsy, barcode Hail Mary. This job interview in Denver wasn't just an opportunity. It was the last rung on a ladder he was about to fall from completely. His daughter, Maya, was with her abuela for the day, a small mercy. He hadn't wanted her to see the frantic hope in his eyes, the kind that flickers brightest just before it's extinguished. She was 7, and her world was already shrinking. Their apartment was cold, the landlord's notices were turning from polite reminders to crimson threats, and her upcoming birthday wish, a new bicycle, shiny and blue, felt as unattainable as a trip to the moon. This job, a manager position at a logistics firm, was his moonshot. It meant a steady paycheck. It meant the heating would stay on. It meant a blue bicycle with silver streamers on the handlebars. Final boarding call for Flight 2814 to Denver. A disembodied voice echoed through the concourse, serene and unfeeling. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. Gate C12. He could see it 100 yards away, a beacon of possibility. He clutched the worn strap of his single carry-on bag, a bag that held his only suit and the last of his pride. His shoes, resoled twice, slapped against the polished floor as he broke into a determined, shuffling run. People blurred past him, faces lost in their own journeys. He was just another anonymous man running toward a gate, his story invisible. He was halfway there, weaving through a throng of travelers gathered around a departure screen, when he saw her. She was an elderly black woman, standing alone, her posture a study in quiet dignity. She wore a simple wool coat, the color of heather, and a small silver brooch in the shape of a starling was pinned to her lapel. Her hair was a crown of elegant snow-white braids. As he drew near, her hand went to her temple, a slight, almost imperceptible wobble in her stance. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, clouded over for a fraction of a second. And then she fell. It was not a dramatic, flailing collapse. It was a slow, quiet surrender to gravity, as if the strings holding her upright had been gently snipped. Her purse slipped from her grasp, its contents. A wallet, a pair of reading glasses, a tube of lipstick, scattering across the floor. The river of people parted around her, a momentary eddy of surprise, and then flowed on. A few cast concerned glances, but their own deadlines, their own flights, pulled them forward. No one stopped. To them, she was an obstacle, a delay. The voice on the intercom repeated its final call. Flight 2814 to Denver. All passengers should now be on board. C-12 was so close. He could make it. A 30-second sprint. He could pretend he hadn't seen. He could tell himself someone else would help, that a professional, a security guard, would be there in a moment. Denver was waiting. A warm apartment was waiting. A blue bicycle was waiting. His entire future was waiting at that gate. He looked at the woman, lying still on the cold, unforgiving floor. Her eyes were closed, her face pale against the dark gray of her coat. He saw his own grandmother in the delicate, wrinkled skin of her hands. He saw the quiet vulnerability of a human being in need, utterly alone in a crowd of thousands. The gate, the job, the future, they all receded. A different imperative, something deeper and more fundamental, took hold. It was the voice of his late wife, Lena, whispering in his memory. Kindness costs nothing, Eli. It's the one thing we can always afford to give. He stopped running. The decision was made in the space of a single, ragged breath. He turned away from gate C-12 and knelt beside the woman. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He placed 2 fingers on her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. A wave of relief washed over him. He carefully gathered her scattered belongings, tucking them back into her purse. He looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd for a uniformed official, a first aid station. Anyone. "We need some help over here," he called out, his voice swallowed by the terminal's cavernous echo. Finally, a TSA agent, his face a mask of weary indifference, ambled over. "What's going on?" "She just collapsed," Elias explained. "I think she needs a medic." As the agent spoke into his radio, Elias could hear the faint, final announcement from his gate, the one that sealed his fate. "The doors for Flight 2814 are now closed." The sound of the jet engine spooling up outside the massive terminal window was the sound of his last chance taking off without him. He closed his eyes for a moment, a profound and hollow ache settling in his chest. He had just traded his future for a stranger. He prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore that he had made the right choice. He stayed with her, holding her hand, a small anchor of human connection in the sterile chaos. Paramedics arrived, their movements efficient and practiced. They spoke in clipped, professional tones, taking her blood pressure, asking questions she was still too disoriented to answer. Elias provided what little information he could. "Did you see what happened?" one of them asked. "She just fell," Elias said. "She seemed a little dizzy for a second, and then she went down." Slowly, the woman's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with confusion at first. Then they focused on Elias's face, on his hand still gently holding hers. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep, searching intelligence. "You," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I'm here," he said. "You're going to be okay. They're taking care of you." The paramedics helped her onto a gurney. She never took her eyes off him. As they began to wheel her away, she struggled to speak again. "Wait," she said, her voice a little stronger. "Your flight." Elias managed a small, sad smile. "It's all right. There will be other flights." The lie felt like ash in his mouth. There wouldn't be. The company had been clear. This was their only interview slot. The ticket had been non-refundable, purchased with the last of his credit. "No," she insisted, trying to sit up. "It is not all right. You missed it, for me." "Ma'am, please just rest," he urged. "Don't you worry about me." He walked alongside the gurney as they headed toward the airport's medical station. He felt a strange sense of peace settling over his despair. He had lost everything, but in this small moment he had done the right thing. It had to count for something somewhere. In the quiet of the medical bay, a doctor determined she had suffered a temporary drop in blood pressure, likely from dehydration and exhaustion. They gave her water and had her rest. Elias waited outside, feeling utterly adrift. He had no ticket, no destination, and barely enough money for the bus ride home. His phone buzzed. It was the hiring manager from Denver. "Mr. Flores? We were expecting you on the 9:15 flight. Is everything okay?" Elias's throat was tight. "There was an emergency. I'm afraid I won't be able to make it." He didn't offer excuses. He didn't plead for another chance. He just stated the fact, the weight of it crushing him. "I see." The voice on the other end was cool, corporate. "Well, thank you for letting us know. We'll be moving forward with other candidates." The line went dead. And that was it. The door had not just closed. It had been bolted and barred. He leaned his head against the cool wall of the corridor, the silence of his failure roaring in his ears. A few minutes later, the woman emerged from the room, leaning on the arm of a nurse. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She saw the slump of his shoulders, the utter defeat in his posture. She dismissed the nurse with a polite thank you and walked slowly toward him. "They tell me my name is Esther," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "Sometimes I forget it myself." Elias straightened up. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Esther." "I'm Elias." "Elias," she repeated, tasting the name. "You have kind eyes. And a heavy heart." She looked down at his hands, calloused and worn from years of warehouse work and odd jobs. "You carry a great deal, don't you?" He didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. You sacrificed something important for me, she stated. It wasn't a question. That job interview. He was surprised she had overheard or pieced it together. It's okay. No, it is not, she said, her voice firm, imbued with an authority that seemed at odds with her fragile appearance. Good deeds should not be punished. The world is out of balance when they are. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. It was worn leather, but of obvious quality. She took out a thick fold of cash. Please, she said, holding it out. For your trouble. For a new ticket. Elias looked at the money. There had to be several $100s there. More than he'd seen in one place in months. It was a lifeline. It was rent. It was groceries. It was a fraction of a blue bicycle. His every instinct screamed to take it. But a deeper part of him, the part that Lena had loved, the part he was trying to preserve for Maya, refused. No, thank you, ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I didn't help you for a reward. I'm just glad you're all right. Esther studied him, her gaze intense. It felt as if she were looking right through his worn jacket and tired facade, seeing the very architecture of his character. She didn't insist. Instead, she put the money away. As you wish, she said. But you will permit me one small thing. Your address. I wish to send you a proper thank you note. An old woman's custom. He hesitated. Felt strange, giving his address to a stranger. But her request was so polite, so dignified, that it felt churlish to refuse. He scribbled it on a napkin from his pocket and handed it to her. Thank you, Elias, she said, tucking it carefully into her purse. A young, well-dressed man suddenly appeared at her side, his face etched with worry. Grandmother, I was waiting at baggage claim. Your phone wasn't answering. I was about to have you paged. All is well, Marcus, she said calmly, patting his arm. I was merely delayed. This gentleman was of great assistance to me. Marcus looked at Elias, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes that quickly softened into gratitude as Esther explained what had happened. He offered Elias his hand. Thank you, sir. We are in your debt. It was nothing, Elias mumbled, feeling awkward and out of place. They offered him a ride, but he declined, saying the bus was fine. He just wanted to go home, to hug his daughter and retreat into the quiet misery of his life. As he watched them walk away, Esther moving with Marcus's support toward a private car service, he felt a profound sense of finality. He had intersected with another world for a brief moment, a world of polite grandsons and private cars, and now he was returning to his own, the world of eviction notices and impossible birthday wishes. The bus ride home was a blur of gray, slush-stained streets. The city seemed to mirror his mood, bleak, cold, and weary. When he got to his building, the first thing he saw was a new notice taped to his door. It was no longer a polite request. It was a formal 3-day eviction order, signed by his landlord, Mr. Gable. The legal jargon swam before his eyes, but the message was brutally clear. Be out by Friday, or be removed. He sank onto the top step of the crumbling concrete stoop, the cold seeping through his thin pants. He had failed. Not just himself but Maya. He had gambled their last hopes on a flight he never even boarded. And for what? For a moment of kindness to a stranger he would never see again. The bitterness of it was a physical taste in his mouth. Lena's words about kindness costing nothing echoed with a cruel irony. It had cost him everything. The next 2 days were a slow-motion nightmare. Elias went through the motions of packing, his hands moving mechanically, his mind numb. He sorted through their few possessions, each object a testament to a life that was being dismantled. Maya's small drawings taped to the wall. Lena's favorite coffee mug, chipped but precious. The small, threadbare armchair where he read to Maya every night. How could he explain this to her? How could he tell his 7-year-old daughter that they no longer had a home? He tried to find work. Anything. He walked into every restaurant, every construction site, every temp agency in a 20-block radius. The answer was always the same. A polite shake of the head, a promise to keep his application on file. The city was unforgiving in the winter, Jobs were scarce and hope was scarcer. Mr. Gable, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his cheap shirts and whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes, saw Elias in the hallway on the second day. "Flores," Gable grunted, not bothering to make eye contact. "Just a reminder. Friday morning, 10 o'clock. The marshals don't like to be kept waiting." "Mr. Gable, please," Elias began, his voice cracking with desperation. "Just a little more time. A week. I can get the back rent. I promise." Gable finally looked at him, a sneer twisting his lips. "Promises don't pay the mortgage, Flores. You people are all the same. Always got a story, always a week away from a big break." He gestured vaguely at Elias. "Time's up. I've already got a new tenant lined up. Paying more, too." He walked away, leaving Elias standing in the dim, water-stained hallway, the weight of that casual cruelty pressing down on him. That night, Maya seemed to sense the oppressive sadness in the apartment. The boxes stacked in the corner were no longer part of a game. They were ominous. "Poppy, are we moving?" she asked, her small voice full of a child's unerring intuition. Elias pulled her onto his lap, his heart breaking. "We're going on a little adventure, Mija," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "An adventure?" Her eyes lit up. "Like in the stories you read me?" "Just like that," he lied, stroking her hair. "It'll be fun." She snuggled against his chest. "Poppy?" "Yes, Mija?" "For my birthday. If we can't get the blue bike." "That's okay," she whispered. "As long as we have our adventure together." A tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He hugged her tight, overwhelmed by her love, by her innocence, and by the crushing certainty that he was about to fail her in the most fundamental way a father could. He had no adventure planned. He had nowhere to go. Friday morning arrived with a leaden gray sky that threatened snow. The 10 o'clock deadline felt like a death sentence. Elias had packed their most essential belongings into 2 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. He kept Lena's photo on the mantelpiece until the very last minute. He looked at her smiling face, her eyes full of a belief in him that he no longer had in himself. "I'm sorry, mi amor," he whispered. "I tried." A loud, authoritative knock rattled the door. It wasn't gentle. It was the sound of the end. Elias took a deep breath, pasted a brave smile on his face for Maya, who was watching him with wide, worried eyes, and went to open it. It was Gable, flanked by 2 burly men who looked like they enjoyed their work. "Time's up, Flores," Gable said, a triumphant smirk on his face. He pushed past Elias and into the apartment. "All right, boys, start with the big stuff. I want it all on the curb in an hour. Please, don't do this in front of my daughter," Elias pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. Gable just laughed. "Should have thought of that before you stopped paying rent." The men began to move toward the armchair, the one where he and Maya read stories. Elias felt a surge of helpless rage. He stepped in front of it, shielding it with his body. "Just let me get her out of here first." As this grim tableau unfolded, a long, black car, impossibly sleek and clean against the grimy city street, pulled up to the curb. It was the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood, a visitor from another planet. The back door opened, and Esther stepped out. She was not the frail, disoriented woman from the airport. Today, she wore a tailored cashmere coat and moved with an unshakable, regal poise. Marcus was with her, his expression grim as he took in the scene. They walked up the crumbling stoop and into the open doorway of the apartment. Gable, who had been barking orders, stopped mid-sentence, his jaw going slack. He looked from the impossibly elegant old woman to the expensive car outside and back again. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suddenly shifting from bullying to wary. Esther's gaze swept over the scene. The boxes, the terrified little girl clutching her father's leg, the 2 movers, and the sneering landlord. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, settled on Gable. "Are you Mr. Gable?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. I am, he said, puffing out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority. This is a private matter. I don't think it is, Esther said, stepping fully into the room. She looked at Elias, and for the first time he saw a flicker of warmth, a deep well of compassion, in her eyes. Elias, I believe this man is trespassing. Gable let out a short, incredulous laugh. Trespassing? Lady, I own this building. Marcus stepped forward, holding a tablet. Actually, he said, his voice crisp and clear, you don't. Not anymore. He turned the tablet so Gable could see the screen. As of 8:45 this morning, this property, along with the other 5 buildings you own on this block, was acquired by the Vance Foundation. Gable stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. Vance? Vance Foundation? Who the hell is that? Esther looked at him, her expression one of mild disappointment, as if scolding a child who should know better. I am Esther Vance, and this is my building now. The name hung in the air. Even Gable, in his provincial world of slum rentals, had heard of Vance Enterprises. They were real estate titans, philanthropists, a dynasty that shaped the city's skyline. He looked at the old woman he'd dismissed as an irrelevant intruder and saw her for what she was, power incarnate. He began to stammer, his bluster evaporating into a puddle of panicked sweat. I didn't know. This is just standard procedure. He was behind on rent. I am aware of his financial situation, Esther said calmly. She then turned her attention to Elias. I received your address, Elias. And my grandson, Marcus, is quite thorough. He looks into things. He found a great deal about you. Your wife's passing. Your struggles to find steady work despite a spotless record. Your daughter, Maya, she smiled gently at the little girl, who was peeking out from behind her father's legs. And he found this eviction. Marcus spoke again, his voice like ice. We also looked into you, Mr. Gable. We found a history of illegal rent hikes, neglected maintenance, and predatory eviction practices. The Vance Foundation has a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior. Consider your management contract terminated, effective immediately. Our legal team will be in touch regarding a full audit of your accounts. Gable looked as if he'd been punched. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. The two movers, sensing the dramatic shift in power, backed away from the furniture and began to sidle toward the door. Get out of my building, Esther said, her voice never rising but carrying the unassailable force of a verdict. Gable, along with his hired help, practically scrambled out of the apartment, leaving a void where the tension had been. The silence that followed was profound. Elias stared at Esther, his mind struggling to comprehend the seismic shift that had just occurred. The airport, the fall, his refusal of the money, her asking for his address. It was all connected. Why? He finally managed to ask, his voice thick with emotion. Because kindness should be rewarded, not punished, Esther said simply. My late husband and I built our company on a simple principle. You invest in people of character. For years, we've been searching for the right person to head a new initiative, a community reinvestment fund. A person with integrity, empathy, and a deep understanding of what it means to struggle. We've set up tests, interviews. All of them failed to find the right candidate. Marcus stepped forward. The job in Denver, Elias, it was one of ours. It was a test, a final hurdle to see if a candidate had the right qualifications. But it was a flawed test. It measured ambition, not character. Esther nodded. When you missed that flight, you failed our test. But when you knelt by my side on that cold airport floor, you passed the only test that ever truly mattered. You showed me who you were when you thought no one of importance was watching. She walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the photo of Lena. She studied it for a moment. She was beautiful. She would be very proud of the man you are, Elias. Tears streamed freely down Elias's face, tears of shock, of relief, of a gratitude so immense it felt like it might break him open. Maya, sensing the change, finally let go of his leg and looked up at Esther with curious eyes. "My poppy is the best poppy in the whole world," she declared. Esther's regal composure melted into a genuine, grandmotherly smile. "I know, little one. I know he is." The cascade of miracles had only just begun. That afternoon, the back rent was cleared from an account Elias didn't know he had. A catering service delivered a feast of hot food, filling the small apartment with the scent of roasted chicken and fresh bread for the first time in years. A team of contractors, dispatched by the Vance Foundation, arrived not to evict, but to measure windows for new insulation, to inspect the faulty heating, and to schedule a complete renovation of the apartment, free of charge. But the greatest gift came later that evening. As Elias was tucking a bewildered but happy Maya into bed, there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Marcus, and beside him he held a bicycle. It was brand new, a brilliant, gleaming blue, with silver streamers on the handlebars and a bell that chimed like a tiny star. Maya's gasp was all the thanks they needed. Elias was offered the position of executive director of the new Vance Community Foundation. The salary was more than he had ever dreamed of, but it was the work that ignited his soul. His first project, funded with a generous endowment from Esther, was to oversee the renovation and transformation of all 6 buildings on their block, turning them into safe, clean, affordable housing with a community center and an after-school program. He was no longer just a victim of the system. He was now an architect of its reform. The community, which had watched the morning's drama from their windows with a mixture of fear and curiosity, began to change. The wariness in his neighbors' eyes was replaced by respect, then by friendship. They saw him not as the guy who couldn't pay his rent, but as the man who was fixing their heating and building a playground for their children. Elias, Maya, Esther, and Marcus became a family of sorts. They had dinner together every Sunday in Elias's now warm and beautifully renovated apartment. They celebrated Maya's birthday with a huge party in the building's new courtyard. Esther, who had lost her husband years ago and whose grandson was her only close relative, found in Elias and Maya a warmth and connection she hadn't realized she was missing. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Elias stood watching as Maya rode her blue bicycle in triumphant circles around the new playground. The gray, slush-stained streets of winter were a distant memory, replaced by green grass and blossoming trees. He was no longer a man running on empty, but a man filled with purpose. His heart, once heavy with desperation, was now light with a profound and enduring joy. Esther came and sat beside him on the park bench. They watched the children play, a comfortable silence between them. "You see, Elias," she said softly, her eyes on Maya, "kindness is never a cost. It is an investment. It is the only currency that grows in value the more you give it away. You gave it to a stranger on a cold floor, and the universe simply returned your investment, with interest." He looked at the woman who had changed his life, at the daughter who was his entire world, and at the community he was helping to heal. He had missed a flight to Denver, but in doing so he had finally, truly, arrived home. It was a simple, immutable truth. A single moment of grace, offered without expectation of reward, had the power to rewrite not just one life, but the lives